Just give me a sec to share my slides. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. For those who have joined live and those who would eventually tune into the recorded session, we're gathered this evening again for a conversation on the future of inclusion in River State with a focus on disability inclusion. And we have our wonderful guest, Mrs. Bitebo Gogo, the volunteer, executive director, and founder of Keeping It Real Foundation. Just a quick reminder about our mission as to why we're doing all of this. We've been doing this now for the past 1 year plus. River State hasn't had a long-term vision or plan in now over 50 years now. And we think that has been sort of like at the heart of why the state has struggled with development in the long term, but also had a lot of short-term thinking and political drama, which obviously led to what we had as state of emergency last year that set us back a couple of years. And so we hope that through this project, we'll be able to help align the state's thinking towards long-term ideals and long-term goals, ensuring that we're focused on, prosperity, but prosperity not just for now, but also for the future generations as well. What's quite different about the project is that unlike other long-term planning projects, this is a sort of like an experiment in what happens if citizens lead a long-term planning project. Normally in Nigeria and most parts of the world, this would often be led by governments. But since our government is in a very sad state, as young leaders, we've thought it wise to be able to take on this project to plan for our future. We're also not going to be idle during the elections. As we know, the national elections and state elections are coming up next year, and the dates have actually been brought backwards. So in January and February, we'll be having the presidential and state elections, but most especially the state elections. As a project, we're focused on how we can set the agenda for the elections, ensuring that the conversations that emanate from these conversations are more focused on development, on key issues like disability rights, creation of jobs for young people, long-term planning and stuff like that. So we had launched the polling, which we think is one of the first of its kind, a pre-primaries poll that we've put out there, seeking to get thoughts and inputs from Rivers people and Rivers residents on sort of like the key top issues that political parties should be referring to, and sort of like the candidates that people have in mind as well in run-up to the elections. We hope that post the primaries, we'll be able to engage with all of the candidates from the respective parties. The vision book launches in October or November, depending on the timeline. And then we hope that in December, we'll be able to culminate everything into a big governorship debate, bringing together all the candidates and asking them really tough questions about the future of the state. All the information for the project is available on YouTube. So for those who miss sessions, we do well to record and document everything. And our website also has sort of like the information about the project and what we're trying to achieve over the next couple of months. Okay, so just before I pass this over to Bira, our moderator for today's conversation and our guest speaker, just a bit of data on disability rights generally and the state of disability generally in the country, but also in River State as well. So generally, current data out there, and I mean, we take this with a pinch of salt because we know data in Nigeria is usually outdated. But data out there currently shows that about 12 to 15% of Nigerians live with some form of disability, and about 2 to 3% of Nigerians have severe disabilities as well. If you look at across various data points, you're looking at things like employment, education access, public infrastructure, and also representation. People living with disability rank way lower than the general population in employment, which we even know is a bigger challenge for everyone. I mean, think of the fact that people with disabilities also have a much more bigger challenge there, because you have 56 for general population and about 30% for people with disabilities. And then for education access, children living with disabilities ranked somewhere between 40 to 45%. I feel like Mrs. G has quite a bit more experience in this because she's done quite a bit of work in this space for over the past almost 2 decades now. So she'll be able to speak a bit more about this. But I mean, children with disabilities can't even access classrooms, can't even get the kind of special care that they need. And so that's also a huge challenge. If we look at public infrastructure, that's even much more bigger. How many schools, churches, even our transport system have things like ramps or access ways for wheelchairs to be able to get into buses? How many military buses can a person with a wheelchair, for example, access today? And how do we ensure that as we think about mobility and transportation for the future, we're also thinking about how it's also inclusive across all ramifications? Even worse, when you look at representation, and this is even national data, political office, less than 1% of people in political office um, have any kind of disability, and about 1 to 2% have gotten appointments. People across the country and people living with disability have done so much advocacy about this. There's been quite a lot of tokenism, but even now we've even lost the tokenism because governments basically are just showing that they don't really care anymore, and the appointments and stuff, they don't even give all of the quota systems that had been agreed on in the past. If you look at River State in particular, so this report released by Africa Polling showed that about 359,000 people in River State have more than one disability. This was a report that they did about assistive technology, speaking about how there's a huge gap in uh, providing technology that aids people with disabilities to be able to live a very equitable life and dignified life, and how there's a huge gap for that in Nigeria. So that's where that report is from. And sadly, River State actually has the second highest number of people living with disability in Nigeria after Lagos, which is really crazy when you think about it. So that again adds to the conversation as to why, as a state, we should be thinking, not just thinking about the future in terms of high rises and big roads and all the things that the typical politicians think about, but how do we ensure that the state is equitable and inclusive for every single person in the state? When we asked AI to visualize what an inclusive city can look like, these are some of the photos that came out. Things like elderly care, which currently is not even structured in our country, right? Because we imagine that when people get old, we send them to the village, right? Without any thinking for elderly care. But if you even look at people who might have who are physically challenged, mobility issues, or visually impaired, can a visually impaired person, for example, take a bus in River States, right? And so I think AI is challenging us to start thinking beyond just, like I said, the regular big roads and big bridges and those kind of things that political conversations usually dominates, to ways where we think and dream differently from where we are currently. So, and I mean, I guess knows so much more about this. She's the expert, and much more. She's also focused a lot on education for children and people living with disabilities and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And just like you heard in her TED Talk, this is something that's quite personal to her, and she's been doing this for a very long time. So I'll read her bio quickly, then I'll pass this to Bira to take us forward. Mrs. Bitebo Gogo is a lawyer by training. She's an inclusion strategist and social impact leader with over 2 decades of advancing equitable development in Nigeria. She's the founder and volunteer executive director of KIR Foundation, a disability inclusive organization established in 2010 that has reached more than 100,000 people through education, advocacy, and capacity development programs. She was called to the bar in 1995, and she brings legal precision to community transformation, expanding access to inclusive education, employability pathways, and civic participation for women, young people, and persons with disabilities. Under her leadership, KIR runs a vibrant, youth-centric, disability-inclusive community center, probably the only one in the south of this country, to be honest, and has established over 90 reading corners nationwide and trained more than 2,500 youths in markets relevant skills. Her work translates to policy, into practical systems that widen opportunity and strengthen dignity at scale. So thank you so much, Mrs. G. I mean, for those of you who might not know, I have worked with Mrs. Gogo so many years ago, for quite a number of years, across multiple spaces, whether it's working with her when we set up the Global Shapers community here in Port Harcourt, or even when we work together, advising the special advisor to the governor on sustainable development and just in life generally. She's been a mentor, but also like a strong support base for me as an individual, but also for the work that I've done across the state. So she's really deeply passionate about everything that we're doing. So I'm just really glad and happy that we could find time on our calendar for her to join us. So enough blabbing from me. I'll pass this on now to Bira to take us forward. Thank you so much, Mrs. G, for joining us.
Thank you, Ivan.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to a very special good afternoon to our guests, our expert, and our speaker. We are happy to have you join us today to, talk about the furtherance of people with disability in our state. And we look forward to like a very, very interesting and information, a lot of information from the conversation today as well. So once again, welcome, Ma.
Thank you, Biriam, for having me.
All right, so thank you. All right, so first and foremost, before we dive deeply into like the conversation for this afternoon, we'll just take a brief dive at the current situation, the current reality of people living with disability in Rivers State. So under this current reality, we'll look at two standpoints, two questions. So the first one will be, how would you assess the current state of disability inclusion in Rivers State as a whole?
Okay, so let me just digress a little bit, because I think it would be quite unfair for me to just dive into the topic without
Okay.
also commending the incredible work that, your team is doing. Because I believe that a citizen-led development blueprint gives Rivers State the social license, practical intelligence, and public accountability needed to deliver development that is inclusive, credible, and sustainable. And the reason why I say that is because when development or ideation is bottom up, you then find that people will be committed to ensuring that such a policy, becomes a reality. But when it is government-led, then people might experience apathy at the bottom level. And so I want to actually encourage you guys because I believe that with what you're doing, there will be diversity of voices, there will be adequate feedback, and then it will not be a tokenistic, exercise because everybody that is relevant is brought on board. And it's no small feat in a country like ours, especially in our states, for young people to get up and decide that this is what they want to spend their time doing, especially when there's no funding and, of course, where there's no encouragement from the government. So I'm really, really excited about this. And I believe that no matter what, the outcome is, you guys have already succeeded. Why do I say that? Because this is the first time that we are having, I don't even, I might be wrong, can't recall this happening in other parts of the country where young people are leading the vision for the next, 25 years, the blueprint for development. So I felt that it's important to encourage you to keep it up, no matter what the outcome would be. And even if the government doesn't up onto your boss, but one thing I do know for a fact is that it's going to change the narrative in the long run. One, it will give us more trust better data, sharper priorities, strong accountability, wider inclusion, and better execution. So thank you once more for having me before we up on to, what we have for today.
Thank you so much, Ma. You're very much welcome, and we are very glad to have you on this conversation as well. There is no better person to have included for this particular discussion and line of talks other than you, and we are so glad that you could find time for us again.
Okay, so for the question that you asked, the first question that you asked, the way that I have approached this discussion is actually by looking at the fact that although Rivers State does have a Rivers State Disability Welfare Enhancement Law 2012, I remember that in 2014, 2015, myself and some other prominent voices in the disability community were co-opted into a special committee by the then Rivers State Commissioner of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation. And all the efforts that we made to make sure that the Rivers State Disability Welfare Enhancement Law 2012 becomes a public, comes into public domain, was met with frustration because we made courtesy visits to the then director in charge of the departments involved in ensuring that this law comes into public domain. It never happened. And so, despite the fact that I think it's just tokenism, if you ask me, despite the fact that we have such a law in place, which most people don't even know about, and even getting the main framework of the law is difficult in the public domain. So, but the snatches that one is able to get, you find out that it is inadequate in scope and it is weak in enforcement in terms of implementation. And therefore, just like we had in 2014, 2015, there's been a long-standing call for activation, review, replacement to align with the Disability Acts of 2018. That's the Nigerian Disability Act of 2018, Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act 2018. Also, like Benisa said earlier on, we don't even, I don't know if right now we do, but getting a commissioner, I don't think we do. We don't have that. A commissioner that is focused on disability inclusion, we don't have that. Neither do we have even a commission. At least at the federal level, we have a commission, although even that commission is not very effective. But at the state level, we don't have such a commission. And so what we have is still the model of charity, the charity model of disability, where you have persons with disabilities being treated like the government or even society generally is doing them a favor. Whatever they get is due to the magnanimity of the government. And so you see how situations where, persons with disabilities resort to, um, carrying placards, picketing, going to ensure that their voices are heard, not through dialogue, but through any force or means whatever they can do to get their voices heard. So that's the pathetic state that we find the state in. Of course, even the 5% representation when it comes to public employment has not been adhered to. I mean, a recent case in point is the new university. I think it's a university in River State. And I remember one of the young people was discussing with me recently that she's vision impaired, and she was the former secretary of the Joint National Association of Persons with Disabilities, the River State chapter, which from what I heard has even been disbanded in River State because of internal um, division and wrangling. So, well, you have different groups going to make representations. And at the end of the day, um, more or less, the institution has said that they were not willing to listen to any of their voices. So there's a stalemate right now. So when there's no clear path, even to representation, you then find out that as far as the government or society is concerned, in this day and age, in the 21st century, um, disability rights still remain at the charity level. They're not fundamental human rights in River State or in Nigeria for that matter. So that's the current state that we're in.
Okay, thank you so much, Ma. Very well said. Very well put. I mean, the gap is so much, both at the federal level as well, and also in River State. So, but let me put it directly. If we are going to like circulate it down, although the gap is very obvious. The should I say the weight of the gap is so much. But if we are going to circulate down and say this is the particular area that the gaps are most visible, where would that be? Like which sector would that be? Would it be education, employment, infrastructure, public policy, or even social attitudes? So where are the most visible gaps if we are to circulate down and say these are the sectors?
Okay, I think that first and foremost, I would say that it's public opinion because you see, once public opinion is changed, then every other thing would flow from the public opinion. Like I just said to you earlier on, the mindset is still at the charity level, where persons with disabilities are looked as people that deserve to be given handouts, or the society or the government is doing them a favor. So long as the mindset is there and it's not from a rights model, whereby we see persons with disabilities as persons that have fundamental human rights that are protected by the Disability Act of 2018, even by the Constitution of Nigeria. So long as we're still at that level, then it will be difficult to change anything else, because that becomes an afterthought. Persons with disabilities will not be included in ideation process, you know. So that is, for me, that is where it starts from. Planning rules, building codes, ICT regulation, electoral participation. If the perception of society has not changed, there is no way that these factors will be taken into consideration when planning is being done. So I give you an example. If Rivers State 2015 needs an African example, one of the countries that they can reference is Rwanda. Rwanda, for example, demonstrates how inclusion becomes real, because when you look at Rwanda, just the things that I mentioned to you, there is a record that shows that Rwanda's constitution, their policies, are actually focused on disability inclusion, building planning rules for accessibility, adoption for regulations for ICT accessibility, practical electoral accommodations. All of these things have been put in place in Rwanda, and they're currently working. Why? Because from the onset, the idea that persons with disabilities are human beings first, with rights as every other person, has been clearly stated in their constitution and in their policies. So for Nigeria and for going down to River State, like I said earlier on, is tokenism, and persons with disabilities are still treated from the charity model where we believe that we're doing them a favor, not that they deserve it, not even from the social model. The social model of disability and the human rights model of disability go together. Why? Because the social model of disability says that a person is disabled not because a part of his or her body doesn't work, but because the society has not provided the enabling environment for the person to be able to do the things that they can do, despite the fact that that particular part of their body doesn't work. So that's the major crux of the matter. If we cannot deal with the ideology or the model that we're operating, it will be difficult to change any of our, policies.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you for beautifully putting it. All right, so let's take the conversation to the policy angle. Let's look at it from the laws and policies that are existing. But specifically, I want us to look at it from the standpoint of sufficiency. Do you think that the existing laws and policy are sufficient, sufficient enough to protect PWDs in River State? I know that the state is still in the process of domesticating the Act of 2018, which they are not, done with the domestication. But if we are just now looking at the sufficiency of that, or the sufficiency of the provisions of that act, do you think it is enough? Do you think we need more inclusions and all of that?
Say that the Disability Act of 2018 is very, very, encompassing. Why do I say that? Because it covers practically every area. It's a strong rights-based national framework. It has accessibility duties across public infrastructure and transport, accessibility of information in appropriate formats, enforcement of architecture through a national commission framework, covers education, covers health, covers practically everything. And it is based on the the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it pretty much covers everything. One of the things that people have said over and over again about the laws in Nigeria is not for opacity of laws or the lack of them, but it's when it comes to implementation, when it comes to execution, there's no political will for execution. And I believe that the reason is because we have oppressive governments. We have governments that still rule like we're in a serfdom, or where, like you have back in the days when we had kings and all that. So that's still the same mentality that is rife in our political infrastructure, where the president or the governor is seen as the king. And there's this megalomania mentality where everybody is under the political leader and, has to, curry favor from the leader for things to work. So it's not for the fact that we don't have the right, national framework. The national framework is one of the best in Africa, but there's no political will to implement those laws. So that's why I still take you back to the fundamental, because if the model, because you have different models of disabilities, and the two models that have worked effectively hand in hand are the social model of disability and the, rights-based model of disability. So long as those two models are not infused in our societal framework, you will find out that our policies will not work. And that's exactly what's happening with the Disability Acts of 2018 and also the Rivers State Disability Welfare Enhancement Law of 2012. Now, just to give you a bit of a comparison, if you look at the law from Lagos State, Lagos Special People's Law of 2011, you find out that the state level disability administration is through LASUDA. There's a clear direction for service delivery coordination. Implementation studies show that, compliance across the NDAs is very limited. There's auditing issue, sanctions, budgeting, enforcement. So it's not, like I said, it's not for the lack of laws. It still boils down to the political will to enforce these laws. So that's where the problem is.
Thank you so much for this very clear response. So you see, it's simply that we have quite a very valid policy, but it's just
Yes, we do.
a very weak enforcement and weak
Yes.
implementation, basically. All right, so let me take the conversation further to infrastructure and access. I know that the answer to these questions are quite evident, but just from your perspective as an expert in this field, how would you say our public institutions are accessible to PWDs? So I'm talking about schools, courts, hospitals, which is very important for them. Government buildings. How would you say they are accessible?
Okay, so I'm going to look at this from various angles. And the first thing that we're looking at is Ministry of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation, whose primary mandate is disability policy coordination and social protection. And so when you look at it, you find out that this ministry just basically focuses on welfare programs. That's what it focuses on. Instead of looking at rights and system enforcement, it just looks at, providing just basic things, food, um, um, conducting programs that even persons with disabilities have to beg and appeal before they do that, So first and foremost, the Ministry of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation has to move from welfare programs and move to rights and systems enforcement. If that is not done, then you will not have any form of accessibility for persons with disabilities. It will not be sustainable. So the case in point was when during the tenure of Governor Rotimi Amechi, we had a robust scholarship system for persons with disabilities to go outside the country to study. And I mean, I was part of one of those not graduation ceremonies, when the young ladies came back from, I think, Manchester University, I can't quite remember. But one of them had a first class mobility challenge, grew up in the Churchill home in Port Harcourt. The second person who was mobility challenged had a 2-1, and they were given scholarships by the institutions where they studied. Okay, now juxtapose that with the widely circulated story of a young lady who was already in her 3rd year in Rivers State University, but, was deaf. And she realized that her lecturers were discriminating against her. There was no provision for a sign language interpreter. And so she decided to, create awareness about it in the school. Guess what? They kicked her out of the school. And then she took the matter to court. And what was the decision of the court? That she should go back to year 1. while the school is still trying to figure out how to bring in a sign language interpreter. And so that is the kind of case that if we have a thriving Ministry of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation, should be able to look into, to say, no, this is wrong. This young lady has the rights to be in school. And the law has provided that in that situation, she actually needs a sign language interpreter. But that was not done. Okay, so in answer to your question, accessibility is not just, physical infrastructure. It also has to do with rights and systems of enforcement. And the major ministry that is responsible for that is the Ministry of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation. When we look at the Ministry of Education, for instance, there is no clear-cut policy from the Rivers State Ministry of Education on disability inclusion. Here, I'm going to be very practical. We have one school, only one school in Rivers State. I think Ebenezer has gone there with KIR Foundation before. We have only one school in Rivers State that caters for primary school and secondary school, that caters for children with disabilities. And at some point during Rotimi Amechi's tenure, we still moved for that school to become more disability inclusive. Matter of fact, what we were advocating for was not for children to be put in a particular school where all of persons with disabilities, because in the world that they live in, there's no world for persons with disabilities. There's no world for persons without disabilities. That's why we're having this conversation on inclusion right now. So what we advocated for was to build an inclusive education system from primary to tertiary level. Well, in fairness to Governor Amechi, we have made some strides in this regard because he went ahead and set up, Ignatius Ajuru University. And I don't want to take credit for that, because this is a public domain. But Professor Atseng, I don't know if she's a professor now, she used to be in the special school in Port Harcourt. And when we had the trying to remember the town hall meeting, yes, because that was one thing that Amechi was very good at. And I'm going to advise you young people, have town hall meetings. Not everybody will show up, but some people will show up. And he was very authentic about his town hall meetings. So I was there for two of them, and one of them we discussed extensively about disability inclusion. And on the basis of that, Mrs. Ateng was given the opportunity to become part of the process whereby they could establish from College of Education, they transitioned to Ignatius Ajuru University. And Ignatius Ajuru University has a special education department, which is very laudable because when you look at the Niger Delta, Ignatius Ajuru University is the only university, I believe, that has a special education department. But even at that, it's really not funded. Okay. Then the same lady also went to Rivers State University, and now Rivers State University also has a special education department. And I think that when we have leaders that are actually interested in changing the initial concept that I talked about, where you're moving from the charity model to a rights and social model, you find out that these are the things that will be put in place. So in terms of the tertiary level, I'm going to say that reforms have started taking place, but in terms of the lower level, where you have, primary and secondary school, there's only one school. And most of our schools, most of our public schools are not disability inclusive. In terms of the pedagogy, they're not inclusive. Assistive technology provision, even when they provide, there's still the rudimentary ones. You won't go to schools and see wireless Bluetooth keyboards, uh, um, um, readers, recorders, and things like that. What they will provide for them most of the time are typewriters. You won't see laptops, are typewriters and braille slates. Those are the things that you will see. So in terms of reforms at the tertiary level, yes, they've done quite well at that level. When you look at the Ministry of Works, we all live in Port Harcourt. When you're looking at new developments, do you see that it is taken into consideration in terms of construction and maintenance of public infrastructure, that from the design thinking, that accessibility is put in place? I give you an example. If you go to the new Maiwon market, we wanted to go and do a movie there or a short clip there. I think you guys should try it, but we were so scared that at the end of the day, whoever goes there would have a serious accident. Go to the market. There's a so-called ramp there. Even as a person without mobility challenges, coming down that ramp, if you decide to take that ramp, you end up with headache at the end of the day. You look at our airports, for a long time, advocates of disability inclusion were talking about the international airports in Abuja. I know we're talking about River State now. I also know that even at a point, had to focus on the Port Harcourt International Airport, the sorry state of the airports. So accessibility is fundamental, when it comes to infrastructure. When you look at it, ramps have to be retrofitted, lifts, accessible pathways. When you're having a program in Ministry of Justice, you find out that there's no lift there. They expect people to walk up the stairs. And how do you do that? Okay. Do we even have enforcement of accessibility codes? Do we even have accessibility codes? That's the question. Does Ministry of Works have accessibility codes? Okay. So River State infrastructure should be accessible by design. So that's another thing that we need to look at. Ministry of Transportation. You're in River State. I could send the question back to you. Do you know of any public transportation system that is fitted with lifts for persons with disabilities? Do we give priority seating? In fact, in your buses, I don't even think that they wait for persons with disabilities to board. Is there any training for accessibility when it comes to transportation in River State? I seriously doubt it. We don't have accessible buses and terminals. It is quite pathetic because more often than not, when you invite persons with, Ebenezer can attest to it, when we did a program with PIND, we had to ask for transportation fare for persons with disabilities. Why? Even to get into the public transportation system, there's a general disregard for persons with disabilities. So more often than not, they are the poorest in the society, but they're expected to take, drops, they are expected to take Ubers and all of that. That's because the transportation system is not inclusive. There's no inclusive transport policy framework. Okay. So for 2050 vision, your role is to ensure that there's inclusive mobility systems across the states. Ministry of Health. In fairness to Governor Amechi, we have a lot of public health facilities, but most of those facilities are even, going to rot. Even the schools that he builds, most of those facilities are going to rot. And you find out that we don't even have sign language interpreter services in our hospitals. We don't have accessible hospital infrastructure. We don't have assistive devices to support persons with disabilities, apart from maybe wheelchairs, if you're fortunate to find wheelchairs. We don't have any of that in our hospitals. So you young people, you have a lot of work on your hands, which was why I started by congratulating you and encouraging you. Accessible healthcare systems. The Ministry of Information and Communications. I think that this is where the biggest work has to be. Because if we have the right sensitization, just like what your team is doing currently, and people are sensitized, like I said earlier, I'll still go back to the basics, because whether we throw big figures around, it means nothing to persons with disabilities. The most important thing is just like when Amechi was having the town hall meetings. When these issues are brought to the public fore and we are able to talk about them sincerely, and people are made to understand that disability rights are human rights, and that we're the ones who disable people. If that communication is made clear on a daily basis, sign language interpretation is made in public broadcast, you have captions for government media content, accessible government websites, you go to government websites and you find out that, they are accessible for even people who are blind, information in multiple formats. You will see that the attitude towards persons with disabilities will change. So public communication must be accessible to all. And even these laws that we're talking about, if the Ministry of Information and Communications takes it up as a priority, you will see that the mindset of individuals concerning persons with disabilities will change. So what is your role in this regard? You must work with Ministry of Information and Communication and the media houses to deliver accessible public communication systems. When we look at employment, recently the Rivers State government did recruitment. Was the 5% that the Disability Act of 2018 made mandatory for persons with disabilities, was it adhered to? That's another question that we have to ask. Because inclusive governance requires inclusive public employment. When Ebenezer was talking, he made reference to the fact that we don't even have, persons with disabilities, represented in government. Just like you have the Women Affairs Ministry, okay? I remember in 2014, when myself and, the late Danlami Bashiru, he was the African representative to the United Nations on Disability Rights. He was going to represent Nigeria, and the Ministry of Women Affairs insisted that he had to come under them. And he said, no, I don't have to. What I need is for persons with disabilities to stand on their own and be able to speak for themselves. Well, whatever funding they were going to give to him, they refused to give him the funding, and he had to raise money to go for that meeting. And guess what? Ministry of Women Affairs representatives that came, more often than not, could not even speak adequately on the topic of the current situation of disability rights and issues in Nigeria. So when it comes to this regard, it is very important that persons with disabilities have their own commission in Rivers State, a commission that will interface with all of these, ministries and departments. And then finally, Ministry of Youth. I remember when the youth policy was being reviewed and it was spearheaded by PIND. They also, reach out to KIR Foundation to make sure that, the youth policy would be disability inclusive. And so for us to be able to have young people whose voices can be heard, then we need to, ensure that the policies, the youth development policy that we have currently is also not just on paper. It is also vital, active, and it is something that is accessible to young people. So when you look at it, if we're not developing future leaders with disabilities, yes, it's good to have a voice to speak for them from time to time, but the impact is different. If, let's say, for example, instead of talking to me, you're talking to somebody who is just like yourself and is a young person and is living the experience, and the person can tell you exactly what it's like to live as a young person with disability in a society that does not consider you first as a human being, but considers you as someone who is a charitable case. And, whenever they feel like they should just throw some handouts to you. So yeah, so in terms of the state of things, when you look at in conclusion, because I know that our time is fast spent and we're rounding up, for Ministry of Works, accessible buildings, education, inclusive schools, for healthcare, accessible hospitals, employment, inclusive public workforce, transportation, accessible mobility, communication, accessible media, youth development, leadership pipeline, and coordination, Ministry of Social Welfare, public policy oversight. I don't know if you have any questions, but this is what I'm going to say at the end. Disability inclusion must move beyond welfare ministries. Real inclusion begins where decisions are made about infrastructure, education, employment, and digital systems. This means embedding accessibility across all the MDAs.
Wow, very, very beautifully said, ma. Very, very beautifully said, and sort of encompasses a lot of things at once. I personally resonate with the fact that we should have a special commission with key emphasis on pushing for the needs of people with disabilities. I think in that we sort of like solve a host of other issues. Maybe we'll now have compliance units who can now monitor or work with the other ministries to see that there's proper inclusion and all of that. So thank you so much for that very beautiful insight, man. But taking it forward, I want to ask specifically about economic inclusion. So I just want to say, I know you sort of like talked about almost everything, but specifically, what do you think are the systemic barriers that prevent persons with disabilities from participating fully in the economy?
Okay, so in terms of economic barriers, number one, education is very key, because if somebody is not and doesn't even have a primary level of education, like I said earlier on, we only have one school in the whole of Rivers State, one school for all the children with disabilities, any kind of disability that you can think of, one public school. Nursery, they go there for nursery, primary, and secondary school. And I don't want to go into too many details, but as at the time that we got there in 2012, we had to adopt the school. Those students were only learning four subjects. And one of those subjects that was excluded was mathematics. They didn't even have sign language interpreters in the school. That had predominantly about, if I'm not mistaken, as at that time, 150 deaf children. There were about 250 children from primary to secondary school in this. I can remember that because, we're there for like 5 years. So that was one of the issues that we brought up during the town hall meeting, and Amici got involved in it. Amici's government got involved in it. So what we found out at that time was that most of those children that, now I'm talking practical, I'm not talking theory. Most of the children that finish from the school, because they learn only four subjects, Then they were not even doing any kind of skills training in the school. KIR Foundation had to introduce skills training into the school so that they have other pathways. They want to go the vocational paths. They didn't even have that in the school. I don't think, because after 5 years we had to pull out because it was no longer sustainable. I don't think that has continued until we pulled out. They haven't continued with us. So when you have children, so what happens is that when they finish from secondary school, most of them end up as, housekeepers. Some of the girls, end up as prostitutes, and all of us. So if the education is not right, then the accessibility to economic empowerment will be very low. Now, even the idea of when they want to empower persons with disabilities, the idea is so wrong because in a proper needs assessment is not done to find out whether if we meet this need, will it create opportunities? Because you have to have opportunity assessments. What kind of training can we give to young people with disabilities or women with disabilities that will enable them or empower them to become economically dependent or at least interdependent? More often than not, that question is not asked. So you find out that a lot of it just, let's be very honest. Our governments or even the corporate organization, if I stay here with you, won't leave. He's used to tokenism. So they're not, the intent more often than not is not sincere. Okay. So education is one of the things that, is a major barrier. The second thing is, we still go back to ideation. At the beginning of it, is there a credible needs assessment that is made? Do they do opportunity assessments? I don't want to make it about KIR Foundation, but Ebenezer is there and he can access to it. When we're involved in PIND, our own approach was totally different. What we insisted on was the fact that let's have a disability inclusive training where you have both persons with and without disabilities training together. For LD competition, apart from that, for social integration. So after the training, there was internship opportunity. And you see, because of the discrimination, we can't avoid, if we cannot change the mindset of the people, it's difficult. A case in point, Ebenezer knows the young lady that I want to talk about right now. Maria Okese. Maria Okese was one of the young people that we met in the special school. Very intelligent girl, deaf, beautiful. And she was the best in ICT training and in photography. We employed her as our in-house photographer. Along the line, she said she wanted to go into modeling. There was no modeling institution that was willing to take Maria Okese. I mentioned this young lady with profound respect. Maybe you guys will know her. Esther Zini. We used to do Is and As, fashion show. I spoke to Esther, and Maria was able to get an opportunity to walk the runway with them as a deaf person. And then went on to become the first Miss Deaf Nigeria. Today, Maria is working with Studio 24, the same Studio 24 we approached in Port Harcourt to take her on as a professional photographer. But because of the fact that she became Miss Deaf Nigeria, she got the opportunity to work in Studio 24 in Abuja. One of the major things that they asked me when I went to look for employment opportunity for her in Studio 24 Port Harcourt was the stereotype they had that deaf people get angry easily. And I asked the lady a question. I said to her, let's say you are Yoruba and somebody is talking about you, they're mentioning your name, and they're not talking to you. You can see that they're obviously talking about you, but they're not, talking to you. How would you feel? So the stereotype, there's already a stereotype, there's stigmatization. So discrimination, stigmatization is there, lack of educational opportunities. In terms of policy, we've talked about policy already. At the ideation level, they are not taken into consideration. Okay, so these are some of the things that prevent, persons with disabilities from becoming economically empowered. A lot of times when people are planning programs, they are an afterthought. More often than not, when I go into a room that I'm invited to participate in any capacity whatsoever, I listen to them talk. And at the end of the day, I say to them, excuse me, in all of these plans that you have, do you by any chance have a space for persons with disabilities? And unfailingly, every time they honestly tell me, you know what, Bitebo, we didn't even think about it. So what I say is that persons with disabilities, although the largest minority in the world, in Nigeria, in river states, are invisible. They're the invisible people. Society deliberately decides to make sure that they're invisible. That's the sad reality.
Thank you
Hello?
so much. Hello, yes, I am with you. Thank you so much for this beautiful insight. Briefly and finally, I want us to just look at representation and leadership. You agree with me, Ma, that if we have more of people with disabilities in the decision-making process, I believe that we would have a better sense of representation for them. So I want to, put this question and say, what do you think we should do, or how do we ensure that PWDs are part of the decision-making process? And not just that, in a way of action points now, what do you think must change in the next 5 years or 25 years to build a proper leadership pipeline for PWDs?
Okay, so I will start with the slogan, nothing, because normally they say nothing about us without us. So from the very beginning, anything that has to do with persons with disabilities, and let's bear in mind that persons with disabilities, you have different disability clusters. You have blind, deaf, mobility challenge, dwarfism, albinism, learning disorders, mental health, and all of that. So nothing about persons with disabilities without persons with disabilities. I think if that, slogan is taken on board, from ideation, the first thing that people will think about is, of course, you have persons with disabilities that are doing extremely well. You have, Jake Epele, even in Port Harcourt there, you have Freki, Andrew Essien. You have so many persons with disabilities who can speak for themselves boldly and clearly. And so what I'm going to, advocate is that the leadership pipeline for young persons with disabilities should be strengthened. And PIND is very good at that. Whatever it is PIND is doing, they ensure that, young people with disabilities are invited for youth policy delivery system. It is very, very important. And I don't know, I'm not trying to put you guys in a bad light, but do you have any young person with disability on your team? So let's bring it home to you guys.
Good point, man. Yeah.
Eben?
Yes, on our steering committee, we have someone who has an issue with his limb. But yes, we have one person, but obviously we can do a lot more. I think that one is
Yeah,
not
you
out of
can bring in
out of the
you
budget.
can bring in Freki and Andrew Essien. Okay. She
For 2019.
Hello?
Anything? Did you want to say something? Okay.
No, I was saying that you can bring in Freki, Andrew Essien.
We
There's
should.
Freki. I can make recommendations,
Yes, please.
so that you have more robust conversations. Okay. disability data should be integrated into whatever it is that you're doing. Okay, I know that, Eben said earlier on that the data is just like any other data in Nigeria. Data is not very specific, but you have to make sure that whatever data that you can get from the international organizations, you get the data, because that will also help you with the planning aspects of it. Another thing is, just like what you're doing right now, you cannot avoid citizen participation. Okay, you need to take this to town hall meetings. Eben was also part of the project that we had in 2016 when we were part of the Sustainable Development Technical Committee. And young people were so excited. Why? Because any non-profit organization that was being run by a young person, those young people were invited and they had a voice. So that's another level that you guys can take this to, So it's not just, don't make it about, just the operative word is inclusion. Okay. So one of the things that young people with disabilities have been disenfranchised from is social inclusion. Okay, so if at every point in time you have the different clusters represented, and I can assure you that in all of those clusters, you have, very loud and educated voices. For instance, making TEDx, Port Harcourt disability inclusive. So these are things that you guys must be very intentional about to make sure that there's citizen participation all through in terms of your reporting channels, your monitoring and accountability. You must make sure that that is put in place. Then another thing that you have to look at is in terms of inclusive education investments, So if we don't have assistive technologies, like I said, how can a teacher be teaching in a public school for deaf children and the teacher does not know sign language? So those are some of the things that you can look out for. You go to the schools and you find out, you get the actual data yourselves. Get the data yourselves. I think that would really help you. And then inclusion scorecards for MDAs is very important. It's just like the guy who was trying to budget it. You can come up with that, for MDAs, scorecards for MDAs on disability inclusion. And you can even give awards to MDAs that you believe are actually pushing inclusion. Okay. So mandatory accessibility compliance, for public infrastructures. We have not even talked about the corporate organization. It's another can of worms on its own, And then, of course, finally, legal alignment of River State Disability Framework with the National Act, with an implementation schedule, So that's very, very important. So, yeah, that's for me. I could go on and on and on, but
Yeah,
yeah, so it's extremely important.
thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a very, very enlightening conversation with you, Ma. We are happy to hear all that you've said, and of course, we would have it included in the policy document, and we'll see to the fact that we try our best and give our own quota as well, just as we've said. So finally, there's a question we ask every expert who comes on this panel, which is what I want to ask, asking about the rivers of your dreams in the next 25 years. So in 2050, where do you see river states?
Okay, a national benchmark for inclusive governance, fully accessible in public infrastructure and digital services, economically inclusive with measurable workforce representation, a leader in inclusive education across Africa, especially for the tertiary institutions. I think that River State is actually trying. A state where disability is not a barrier to dignity, mobility, leadership, or economic participation. In my vision, inclusion is not discussed as a special agenda, but it is embodied in procurement, budgeting, design, and governance culture. Rivers State becomes competitive when it is inclusive. That is my dream for Rivers States.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Ma. I think so far this is one of the most elaborate visions of River State I've heard so far on the panel, and I have to say thank you so much, Ma. God bless you for coming, and we hope that all we are doing is going to come to fruition. Thank you once more, and thank you to everyone who have been listening. Over to you, Iben. Thank you once more.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bira. And thank you so much, Mrs. G, I mean, one thing I love about speaking to Mrs. G is that you always leave with action points all through my life. For the period I've known Mrs. G, for every conversation, there's something you have to do once you speak to her. And I love the challenge she's thrown to all of us. Just listening to her, saying that we should even bring this back home. I think even as a project, we should show inclusion as a model in everything that we do, as a way to show that we're not just speaking the message, but we're also living and acting the message out. So a couple of things that she said. One of them is on our team. Even though on the steering committee, we have one person who is a person with disability, we need to do much, much more. We need to do broader. We need to think broader. So even in the larger group, for those who are here on the call, those who watch the recorded session, ensure that you're checking in your community, in your networks. Let's have more people with disabilities in our task force, because the insights that they bring is something that those of us who don't have those lived experiences will definitely not have. So we need to ensure that we expand beyond that. Two other things, as I heard her speak. One was the Rivers 2050 Vision book. Currently, we're thinking of the book as just a book, but how can a person who is visually impaired, for example, know about this vision? Or how can do you understand? So how do we even bring inclusion even to the book itself? Does it need to be, we talked about it being in different languages, but also do we need audio version? Is it possible to do a braille version? Is it possible to have versions that are available online and but more accessible to people who might not be able to get this particular thing? So that's another question that we should be thinking about. And also at the launch event itself, Joshua isn't here, so we should relay this message to him. Joshua needs to ensure that at the launch event itself, there needs to be sign language interpretation, and there needs to be participation from people from the disability community. So it shouldn't just be the big names and the governors and other people that we're thinking about, but we need to ensure that we're actually having these individuals also participate as well. I'm happy to see Mrs. G's hand up. Ma, do you have a thought on this? Any of the points that?
Yes, so we actually have a manual that's a guideline for the Disability Act. I will send it to you. Okay. And
Okay.
what this young man, Wisdom Okubo, has done for us, you can work with him, is if you go on our website, www.KIRfoundation.org, he has turned it into an audio version for us. So when blind people, for instance, go on our site, they would just be able to play it. Okay. So it's called It's About Empathy, because for us, we believe that, disability inclusion has to start from the place of empathy. There's a thin line between ability and disability. And if you're able to put yourself in the position of that person, it just makes you realize that this could happen to me. It could happen to any member of my family. And if that is done, then it's easier for you to, go the whole mile, So in terms of resource people, Wisdom Kubo will be able to help you with that. Very important. Your website too has to also become disability inclusive, So you need to get somebody to work that into your website. And of course, you can't have your town hall meetings without the representatives from the disability, clusters. You have the Society for the Blind, you have for albinism, dwarfism, they're all in Port Harcourt there. And if you invite them, they would come, So I also would send you some of the things that I've talked about, because I know that it would also help you in terms of, putting all of this together in a more
Yeah.
streamlined structure, for you guys. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
it's a lot of work. It's like an elephant, and you have to take small bites at a time. But the
Yeah.
most important thing is that you have started, and you're not just paying lip service to it, and you're really, really serious about it. So that's the most important thing. And of course, I'm here anytime if you need
Yes, please.
people that can help you out and get involved.
Yes,
um
please.
I'm always available to give you that support.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ma. We're so grateful for that. And I was about to also ask that please, we understand that now in this new season of your life, there's so much more that you're working on. So, but the plan for the book is to launch the vision book in November, either the last week of October or first week of November. But yeah, we want to, once we finish the drafts and begin to think about how to make this a lot more inclusive, we want to like lean on your expertise and advice on how to ensure that we do this better. So we'll definitely be in touch. Yeah, thank you.
Definitely will be
Thank you.
available anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Just before we wrap up, TG, I can see TG's hand is up. TG, you have a thought or a question before we wrap up?
Yeah, Iben. Thank you, Mrs. G. Good to hear from you, and I'm glad I didn't miss this session. There was
Thank
no better.
God.
Good day, ma.
Oh my word.
Yes, ma. So thank you so much, ma, for this. There was no better person to have been a resource person on this very
There
pertinent
are
topic.
better people, oh, you don't just know them.
I know, but I mean, for what you are doing and what you've done for persons with disabilities and what you've continued to do, I mean, this is just you are just the perfect person, and all that you have said. I wanted to add something, but you've even mentioned it. Even, we work with persons with disability a lot, especially helping them with the electoral reforms
The
and also
reforms,
the
yeah.
part that has to do with persons
Yeah.
living with disability. Just last 2 weeks ago, we supported them to do a rally to INEC where they presented a joint communique on some of the electoral acts that they have to do with persons with disabilities. We are also having like a workshop coming up where INEC will be there, IPAC, and also different stakeholders that have to do with them. So I wanted to, just like Mrs. G said, it would be good that we include them in the town hall. And that's where this will become more inclusive. There's also Jonapid. Jonapid is like the
Jonathan, yeah.
national.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can get like their cluster lead. I can help you with
Okay.
their different contacts for the cluster leads.
That'd be
So
amazing.
even if all of them may not be able to participate, but the cluster leads can join,
Amazing.
just
Okay.
be a part of this. So their contribution is also important. So by the time we launch, we have an inclusive document, that cut across board. So everybody is represented.
That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. I'll follow up with you. I'll follow up with you shortly, just so that we can share those contacts. And I'll also love to be at that session. Yeah. Mrs. G, do you have something to add on Jonapid?
Yes, I want to also suggest that you reach out to Jake Epele.
Okay,
Okay,
Jackie.
Jake Epele is at the national level and has access to not just national, but also international. I don't know how accessible he is, but I'm sure that you
Sure.
should be able
It's fine.
to
Yeah.
access him. Has wealth of knowledge, network, and all that. There's also this other lady, Ikaite Umo,
Okay.
who I think she's working with one of the international organizations. She's also in Abuja.
Okay.
What I could do is reach out to her and then, make the connection so that you have those people who are the
Yeah.
international and at the national level that can help you to move things, forward. And maybe who knows, our blueprints might just become the standard for a lot of other, not just in River State, but other countries as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate the connections that you've promised to make. Also, I made a notes of some of the names as well, so I also follow up with you as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so just in wrapping up, next Saturday we're going to be back here. This was such a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I think just in the spirit of inclusion, whenever conversations are had about like, the future, the, long-term plans and stuff, the next generation is always often missing. It always stays around the adults generation. And I think as part of this project, we've thought to do this differently. And so next Saturday, we're going to have young people aged 10 to 16. We have 6
Oh,
confirmed now.
wow.
We're having a Gen Alpha roundtable, and we'll be talking about everything
Wow.
about their own dreams, their own visions, their thoughts about the current situations and some of their own ideas. And we actually would include this in the vision book as well. So if you know anybody that you think should be useful for this conversation, please also do well to let us know so we can send the parental consent letter to their parent or guardian. But yes, that's something happening next Saturday. So please keep a date with us and join us for that wonderful conversation. I'm personally looking forward to it. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thanks again, Mrs. G. We can't thank you enough. We're going to definitely be in touch. We'll take up all this challenge you're giving to us, and we'll see how one by one we begin to implement them as well for this project, but also generally for River States in the long run. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and see you next Saturday. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye, everyone.